was a very convoluted time. There were a multitude of secret societies.
From about 1888, well into the 1920s, hundreds of secret societies formed, reformed, and gave birth to new and even more secret subgroups. Some were dangerous nationalistic orders, like the Serbian Black Hand Society, responsible for the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria.
Black Hand Society was largely responsible for the First World War.
And many of the era's dark fellowships were simply racist, sharing the sentiments of Lanz von Liebenfels, who believed Aryans were gods.
He also believed that the Jews were literally children of the devil.
The 30 years leading to the formation of the Vril Society was an era obsessed with the strange combination of racial solidarity and the occult.
Magic and occult ideas dominated the thinking of virtually every class of society in the late 19th century.
But of all the mystics of the time, one person's writings may have been the genesis of the phenomenal occult frenzy. Madame Helene Petrova Blavatsky.
I would say that Blavatsky provided the metaphysical framework that has gathered together the vast, vast streams of the ancient wisdom into a coherent system.
Blavatsky founded the Theosophical Society in 1875 and established herself as a kind of sage in the occult realm. Theosophists believe in a combination of Asian and occult ideas to promote the concept of a superior Aryan race.
She traveled throughout the world for spiritual reasons.
Madame Blavatsky wrote, well, several books, but the particularly influential one was The Secret Doctrine.
It was based on knowledge she acquired in India and Tibet.
She claimed that she got her teachings from secret messages from Mahatmas in the Himalayas.
This groundbreaking book, written in 1885, did something no other book had ever done. It combined science and religion. Most sources say that the Vril Society was founded in 1918 at a mysterious meeting in the Bavarian town of Berchtesgaden. It was a holiday center and would later house the country retreat of Adolf Hitler. It is said that in a mountain lodge, a group of occultists and high-ranking German nationalists secretly gathered to create a powerful inner circle called the All-German Society for Metaphysics, otherwise known as the Vril Society.
Essentially, it was founded by two people, Rudolf von Sebottendorf.
Von Sebottendorf had been very active in the occult movement. He was a Freemason, an alchemist, and a founder of the Tula Society. Their belief in a mythical civilization was a precursor to Nazi Aryan ideas.
His real name was Adam Glauer, and he was the son of an engine driver, but he awarded himself a title of nobility.
In creating the Vril Society, von Sebottendorf was joined by a man who would darkly influence world history.
The other main person within it was Dietrich Eckart.
He was said to have strong powers of persuasion, particularly in his anti-Semitic writings.
Dietrich Eckart was Hitler's closest personal friend between 1918 and his death in 1923.
Eckart believed he was paving the road for Germany's own savior.
He was, in many respects, a mad genius. It's no accident he spent a great part of his time in and out of mental institutions.
The founder of the Vril went by a very curious name.
John the Baptist.
And we all know that in the Bible, John Baptist is a sort of paver of the road for the true Messiah.
Eckart was also one of the masterminds behind the Nazi Party.
Eckart saw Hitler as the German Messiah. He saw him as the man sent to save the country.
And he wasn't the only Vril founder who felt that way. It has been suggested that these two men were joined by two women, mediums responsible for finding the hidden occult truths and harvesting Vril.
In those days, it was the golden age of what was known as physical mediumship, where not only were they forever moving objects and table turning and levitating, but also they used to produce a substance called ectoplasm out of their bodies.
One of these mediums is said to have predicted the new German Messiah.
During her state of trance, she declared that the apparition she had given form to was going to be the next German Messiah, who she proceeded to name as Adolf Hitler.
So the Vril Society may have indeed paved the way for the person they would promote as the country's Messiah. Their next step would have been to secure his ultimate weapon, Vril.
They believed that that would give them power.
This occult group of German nationalists may have grown quickly to become an elite inner circle of the Nazi Party.
Many of the top leaders, including Hitler himself, were members of the Vril Society. Karl Harrer, Anton Drexler and Dietrich Eckart are three of the most important figures in the transition from the Vril Society to the Nazi Party.
Eckart was considered the darkest of them all and dedicated to Hitler's success.
He did have certain perverse gifts, and not least of which was his ability to train Hitler in the use of, you know, what one might loosely call the power of a human heart and human mind.
Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, was said to be a member.
It is virtually certain that he was introduced to it in around 1920, probably by Dietrich Eckart.
Alfred Rosenberg, minister of the Third Reich, probably a member.
Rosenberg believed that the Aryan race was superior to every other, of course, and, you know, he believed that Jesus was not Jewish, but an Aryan.
Rudolf Hess, deputy Führer, another likely member.
Hess believed everything. He used to sleep with magnets under his bed to try and draw off harmful emanations.
Martin Bormann, chief of the Nazi Party Chancellery, also thought to be a member.
Martin Bormann was probably considered the most evil one. He was an avowed and open Satanist. He was quite categorical about his desire to exterminate Christianity as well as Judaism, because he saw Christianity as simply, as he called it, a Jewish perversion.
And the most senior Nazi in the Vril Society, Adolf Hitler himself.
A great many of the Vril Society members were conscious Satanists.
And these evil men were emblazoned with a symbol, the swastika.
The darkest side of the Vril was undoubtedly their belief, which dates back many thousands of years, that to sacrifice a young child will give more power than anything else if you are turning to the darkness. And that is what they did.
After the First World War, many illegitimate and orphan children lived in Bavaria. Children whose disappearance would go unnoticed. And legend had it that the Vril of a child was the most concentrated and most powerful.
They were seen as being gateways between the astral and the material world in a way that adults were not. So consequently, they were ideal victims for human sacrifice.
To the year 1917, 4 men and a woman met here in the Viennese cafe Schopenhauer. The young Maria Ortisch, a spiritualistic medium from Zagreb, the student and fighter pilot Lothar Weitz, the occultist, orientalist and officer Karl Haushofer, Rudolf von Sebottendorf, an occultist who had recently returned from the Orient, as well as Prelate Gernot from the Order of Knights Templar. Their subject was the coming of the New Age. They spoke of secret revelations, the spear of destiny, the magical violet black stone. They discussed the possibility of making transmedial contact with the ancient Germanic and Babylonian deities, Ishtar, Ostara, and Isais, and of communicating with distant worlds, not only on this side, but also on the other. It is quite likely that this coffeehouse meeting witnessed the birth of the secret Thule Society, which in turn later spawned the German National Socialist Party, the SS, Black Sun, and the Friel Society, which in its turn gave a foundation to the occult activities of the Third Reich.
Genealogist Karl Friedrich von Frank offered to certify the racial purity of Hitler's ancestry. In this secret hiding place in the castle library, his files on the Hitler family's history lay undetected for decades. Over 1,200 pages document the dictator's mysterious family tree. Soon, every schoolchild in Hitler's Germany had to learn how to prove their Aryan heritage. But the Führer himself had problems with it.
Hitler's own family in no way measured up to the Aryan ideal that he placed before Germany. And there are very few members of his family, when you look through there, who would have measured up to that. And the truth is, most of them would have been considered a blemish or an embarrassment.
Mystery even surrounds the paternity of Hitler's own father. He was born illegitimate under the name of Alois Schicklgruber. Later, he had his father's name registered as Georg Hitler, 20 years after Hitler's death. A dubious proof of identity, but from then on, Alois called himself Hitler. His son Adolf had the family tree published anyway, and wrote to the genealogist, "As far as I and my sisters can tell, it is correct." His family line. But his opponents were looking more closely now, and they discovered a Salomon in the family tree. The press said, "That sounds Jewish." Soon, the papers were speculating about the racial fanatic's own racial heritage. A Vienna newspaper printed pictures of Jewish gravestones inscribed with names like Hitler. Thanks to his uncle, Willy Hitler got a job at the Reich Credit Bank in Berlin. But this Hitler had no taste for regular work. Willy had other plans. In a letter to his uncle, he threatened to take the Hitler family secrets to the British press unless his personal circumstances improved.
It was a blatant act of blackmail on Willy's part. And the most astonishing thing is that it worked.
How did Willy manage to put pressure on the most powerful man in Europe?
Hitler's expressed concern was that Willy had found proof that there was Jewish blood in the Hitler family veins, which would have been absolutely catastrophic for Hitler. The fact was, Willy's threat, allegedly, was the fact that Willy's father, Alois, had committed bigamy.
Hitler had Jewish and African roots, DNA tests show. Adolf Hitler is likely to have had Jewish and African roots, DNA tests show. By Heidi Blake, 24th of August 2010, for The Telegraph. Saliva samples taken from 39 relatives of the Nazi leader show he may have had biological links to the subhuman races that he tried to exterminate during the Holocaust. Jean-Paul Mulders, a Belgian journalist, and Marc Vermeuren, a historian, tracked down the Führer's relatives, including an Austrian farmer who was his cousin earlier this year. A chromosome called haplogroup E1B1B1, which showed up in their samples, is rare in Western Europe and is most commonly found in the Berbers of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, as well as among Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews. One can, from this, postulate that Hitler was related to the people whom he despised. Mr. Mulders wrote in the Belgian magazine, NAC, haplogroup E1B1B1, which accounts for approximately 18 to 20% of Ashkenazi and 8.6% to 30% of Sephardic Y chromosomes, appears to be one of the major founding lineages of the Jewish population. NAC, which published the findings, says the DNA was tested under stringent laboratory conditions. This is a surprising result, said Ronnie Decourte, a genetics specialist at the Catholic University of Leuven. The affair is fascinating if one compares it with the conception of the world of the Nazis, in which race and blood was central. Hitler's concerns over his descent was not unjustified. He was apparently not pure or Aryan. It is not the first time that historians have suggested Hitler had Jewish ancestry. His father, Alois, is thought to have been the illegitimate offspring of a maid called Maria Schicklgruber and a 19-year-old Jewish man called Frankenberger. According to The Independent, titled "Did Adolf Hitler Marry a Jewish Woman?", DNA tests show Eva Braun associated with Ashkenazi Jews. The Dead Famous DNA film tested hair samples which are said to have come from a hairbrush used by Hitler's secret lover and discovered at his mountain retreat by Adam Sherwin, Friday 4th of April 2014. Eva Braun, Adolf Hitler's long-term lover who married the Nazi leader hours before their joint suicide in his Berlin bunker, may have had Jewish ancestry, groundbreaking DNA testing has found. DNA analysis of hair samples from a hairbrush claimed to belong to Braun suggests that the fascist dictator responsible for the murder of millions of Jews may have unwittingly married a woman of Semitic descent in one of his final acts as the Third Reich crumbled. The revelation appears in a Channel 4 documentary, Dead Famous DNA, broadcast next week, in which leading scientists attempt to extract DNA from relics and analyze their genome to solve mysteries associated with them. Forensic scientists sequenced the hypervariable region of the mitochondrial DNA from a sample of hairs extracted from a monogrammed hairbrush found at the end of the Second World War in Braun's apartment at Hitler's Alpine residence, the Burhof in Bavaria, by an American Army intelligence officer. They found a specific sequence within the mitochondrial DNA, a small genome within the mitochondria of the cell that is passed down the maternal line from mother to daughter unchanged over the generations, belonging to haplogroup N1B1, which is associated with Ashkenazi Jews. A haplogroup is a particular sequence of mitochondrial DNA which is passed down the maternal line, and according to traditional Jewish law, Judaism is passed down through matrilineal descent. Photography assistant Braun fell madly in love with Hitler at just 17 years old, although he was 23 years her senior. Hitler ordered his private secretary, Martin Bormann, to investigate Braun's family, who sent Eva to a Catholic school to ensure that they were Aryan and that she had no Jewish ancestors. After being assured there were none, the courtship advanced. But Hitler, fearful that the relationship would harm his public image, refused to marry Eva and kept her a state secret, hidden away at his mountaintop residence, the Burhof. Channel 4 used hair initially recovered in the summer of 1945 by Paul Baer, a US 7th Army captain who was posted to the Burhof and took personal items, including the hairbrush, from Braun's private apartment. There are photographs of Baer at the Burhof in 1945, and the hairbrush was seen authenticated by experts. Baer's son sold Braun's hairbrush to a relic dealer, who separated the hair and sold it on to hair dealer John Resnikoff. Dead Famous DNA presenter Mark Evans bought 8 strands of the hair from Resnikoff for $2,000. The hair was then sent to an international team of forensic scientists for analysis. Channel 4 spokesman said, in the 19th century, many Ashkenazi Jews in Germany converted to Catholicism, so Eva Braun is highly unlikely to have known her ancestry, and despite research he instigated into Braun's race, neither would Hitler. Whilst the results will provide a talking point, they are not definitive. To prove that the hair came from Eva Braun's head, Mr. Evans attempted to get a DNA swab from one of Braun's 2 surviving female descendants, but both refused. Adolf Hitler was born on the 20th of April 1889 in Brunau am Inn, a town in Austria, Hungary, and reportedly died on the evening of the 30th of April 1945 by suicide, by cyanide poisoning and a gunshot wound in his underground bunker in the Reich Chancellery Gardens in Berlin before being burned alongside his wife, Eva Braun. Raised in a Roman Catholic family, Hitler's father was reportedly Alois Hitler, possibly Frankenberger, an anti-clerical Roman Catholic, and his mother reportedly Clara Polzel, a devout Roman Catholic. Roman Catholicism is an offshoot of Christianity, which is an offshoot of Judaism. According to multiple passages in the Bible, Jesus was king of the Jews, as well as being a Jewish rabbi, according to scholars. According to Nazi official Hans Frank, Alois' mother was reportedly a housekeeper for a Jewish family, and the 19-year-old son of the family, Leopold Frankenberger, had fathered Alois. This would explain why, after saliva samples were taken from 39 of Hitler's relatives, a chromosome found in Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews was found. According to Rabbi Marvin S. Antelman in the book To Eliminate the Opiate, Volume 2, now there are some rumblings that Adolf Hitler may have had some Jewish blood imparted to him by a Jew named Frankenberger, who supposedly had a liaison with his grandmother, Maria Anna Schicklgruber, 1795 to 1847. Indeed, a prominent attorney in New York City, Gerald Morgulis, wrote a book called The Torquemada Principle, Wade Rawson, 1980, which advocates this thesis. There is no truth to this. Rather, Hitler was really the product of an adulterous relationship between his mother, Clara Polzel, and a Sabbatean Frankist, 1861 to September 21st, 1928, who was Hitler's real father. The Frankist Sabbateans had a ritual on the 9th of Av, which is observed by Jews as a fast day, commemorating the destruction of the first and second temples. This night, the Sabbateans secretly observed an incest and adultery night. However, there is a persistent rumor that Clara was artificially inseminated that night. Since the Jewish calendar is lunar, the 9th of Av can occur in July or August. Checking the calendar, the 9th of Av, 1888, the date of Hitler's probable conception, fell on July 20th, 1888, approximately 9 months prior to April 20th, 1889, the birthday of Adolf Hitler. A 1933 New York Times article dealing with Hitler's alleged Jewish origins maintained that there was Jewish blood on the Strohns side, Hitler's maternal grandmother, a family which converted to Catholicism from Judaism in Vienna in the 1850s. Rabbinic court testimony claims that not only Hitler's real father was a Sabbatean, but his maternal great-grandfather as well, i.e. Clara's maternal grandfather, who fathered her mother out of wedlock. There is evidence that Hitler maintained close contact with Sabbateans throughout his life. In fact, his personal astrologer, Erich J. Hanussen, murdered in the woods outside of Berlin in February of 1933, a Sabbatean who was called the Prophet of the Third Reich and Magician of Berlin. His real name was Herschel Steinschneider, born in Vienna in 1889, and he was the first cousin of Moritz Steinschneider, 1816 to 1907. To add to Hitler's Jewish chromosome, Nazi official Hans Frank's allegation and the fact that in the 19th century many Ashkenazi Jews in Germany were forced to convert to Catholicism, in a letter from Dr. Heinrich Brüning to Druidic Freemasonic Jew Winston Churchill, written in 1937, Brüning wrote, "I didn't, and do not even today, for understandable reasons, wish to reveal from October 1928 the two largest regular contributors to the Nazi Party were the general managers of two of the largest Berlin banks, both of Jewish faith, and one of them the leader of Zionism in Germany." According to Rabbi Marvin Antelman in his book To Eliminate the Opiate, Volume 1, German Jew Max Warburg funded Hitler. Max Warburg, for example, ran the M.N. Warburg Company in Frankfurt and was a major financier of the Bolshevik Revolution. His bank financed Adolf Hitler.
The Kaiser was financed partly from America by American banks.
Leaving aside the complexity, let me just ask a simple question then. Was this then a situation whereby the Jewish community and somehow was contributing to the Nazi efforts and helping to finance what it is that they wanted to be able to do.
Yeah.
Live on Channel 5, this is the 10 o'clock news with Deborah Norville.
Coming out revealing secret negotiation between the Nazis and the Zionists in 1933, which allowed German Jews and their assets to go to Palestine. Rich Samuels joins us tonight with the story of the controversy behind the book and the author's struggle to write it. Rich?
Deborah, with the rise of Adolf Hitler to power in the spring of 1933, the Jews of the world were faced with a dilemma. They could raise a cry of protest, a cry few would heed, or they could make a deal with Hitler, a deal that would bring a step closer their dream of an independent Jewish state. The choice they made was difficult and agonizing. This new book describes that choice. The book is called The Transfer Agreement. This is Israel a few days ago, the season of Passover. And this is Germany 51 years ago, the blossoming of Adolf Hitler's springtime. A key factor in the vitality of today's Israel, the book's author argues, was an agreement reached in 1933 between a group of Zionists and the man who would later try to kill every living Jew.
The great irony is that Adolf Hitler became the chief economic sponsor of the State of Israel.
It will be an argument against, and a wrong argument against Zionists.
Some who lived through those times fear the response to this book. The parents of the author feared its very writing.
When your son came to you and said he was going to write this book, what were your feelings about his undertaking?
I told him he's not my son anymore.
Why did you say that?
I told him I'm going to sit shitty.
As though he were dead?
That's right.
I told him I don't like it. Because as being a Jew, I didn't want something to uncover on my own people.
I was buried in a grave with 27 people. I was 7 times captured.
Edwin Black's parents are Holocaust survivors.
For what?
My parents never talked much about the Holocaust.
Edwin Black, to fill the void left by the silence of his parents, has written this book, a dense, detailed chronicle of the early months of 1933. January 30th, 1933. Hitler becomes Germany's interim chancellor. The Third Reich has begun. But in this country, on March 4th, attention is diverted by the inauguration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
More power to you, President Roosevelt. The entire country's behind you, thrilled with hope and patriotism.
But ominous headlines tell what's already happening to the Jews of Germany. The protest of American Jews was heard almost immediately. It was based on only the sparsest of press reports, and nowhere was that protest more vocal than here in New York City.
All creeds, local and national organizations, and labor parties are joining this gigantic demonstration passing through famous Washington Arch. Rabbi Stephen S. Wise, honorary president of the American Jewish Congress, leads the procession down Fifth Avenue on foot.
Father arranged for the first great mass meeting at Madison Square Garden to protest Hitlerism. He felt that when freedom was threatened, silence condoned oppression always.
Thousands who waited hours behind police lines rush forward as the doors of Madison Square Garden are open. Jews and Gentiles join in the race for seats, and 22,000 of them get in.
I was a young kid then, you see, as a teenager. And I belonged to a Zionist youth group. And we were all summoned to go to that rally. Well, it was a very agitated crowd. Many Yiddish speaking, a few English speaking. Rabbi Wise mounted an appeal to the Jewish people to do something to save Jewish honor.
Most of the important, well-established Jews were very angry at him, said this was sensationalism, and that if anything happened to the Jews in Germany, the blood of the Jews would be on his head.
Dr. Stephen S. Wise, rabbi of the Free Synagogue and a national leader of liberal thought, speaks in behalf of the Jews of the United States.
This is not a Jewish meeting. This is the conscience of America making itself felt.
The conscience of Nazi Germany made itself felt 5 days later. Across the Reich, Hitler's troops shut down Jewish-owned businesses for 24 hours. Within days, American Jews marched calling for the boycott of all German exports. Jews throughout Europe echoed that call, so did Jews everywhere. But a group of Zionists at the same time was quietly negotiating an agreement with the Nazis to allow the immigration of German Jews and the transfer of their assets to Palestine. That deal, reported in August 1933, was the transfer agreement. Palestine, sparsely settled by Jews at the time, was radically changed as a result.
I lived in Palestine from 1933 to 1936, and we saw every week transports of German Jews coming to settle in Palestine. And many new professions were introduced by them into the country, and they played a leading role in making Palestine then a more advanced and progressive country.
Israel is really what it is because of the foundation laid by the Eastern European group, and then the lift toward an educated and well-organized government that came with the immigration of the German Jewish group.
German Jewish settlement of Palestine was, for a time, official Nazi policy. These photos of Jewish life in Palestine, along with a lengthy text, appeared in 1934 in the Berlin paper Der Angriff. The publisher, Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels. A Nazi Visits Palestine was the title of the multi-part series. A medal was struck by Goebbels in commemoration. On one side, the swastika. On the other, the Star of David. Hitler demanded one concession for the transfer agreement, that the call for a boycott of the Reich, raised by Jews here and elsewhere, be rejected by the Zionists. The Zionists made that concession. And so, while Nazis were marching in Germany, and while Jews were marching here, diplomacy was running a more important story. In the Mediterranean, where the dream of a nation-state for Jewish people came a step closer to reality. The story in this book some will find hard to accept.
I still feel the hurt. But after I read it, I said, I'm all with you. Go ahead and write it.
Because everything was exactly what happened, and that's the truth, and you cannot deny it. And the truth must prevail.
And I'm not worried by the people who will find the book in bad taste. The smart people, the intelligent people, the people who went through will understand.
The author is torn between two profound feelings. That he has to be for a Jewish state, and that the silence which his parents have kept, well, he has to retaliate against that silence, and he takes it out on others.
It was a quest. It took me around the world. Financially, it depleted me. Emotionally, it drained me. And as far as my being a Jewish person and understanding my Jewish identity and my relationship to Israel and the Holocaust, it has fulfilled me. It has given me identity.
That he tries to exorcise his own demons by creating ghosts to visit the nights of others is really a very personal drama. And my only hope is that he will not damage the people, the state, and the brethren and sisters whom he proclaims to cherish.
Did you find what you wanted to know?
Yes, I know what happened, and I know why.
The transfer agreement will be available shortly. Macmillan is the publisher. Deborah?
Thanks, Rich. Really interesting.
May 5th, 1994.
A primetime investigation. They were Hitler's henchmen. Now, for the first time, Argentina has opened its secret files on the Nazis. The startling truth about how many were taken in and given protection.
We sent some 60,000 fugitive Nazi war criminals to Argentina.
Tonight, Sam Donaldson gives you new details about how they escaped with the help of the Vatican and the U.S. government. And he travels from Rome to Buenos Aires to the remote Andes to track down fugitive Nazis who've been living in Argentina all these years. Like this former Gestapo officer, accused of torture and murder.
We killed civilians in the caves.
No. That was us. I think that was ordered by our command.
But orders are not an excuse. Prime Time. Now from Washington, Sam Donaldson.
Good evening. The movie Schindler's List has rekindled the horror of Nazi Germany for Americans. But if you think it all ended some 50 years ago, you're wrong. Tonight, we're going to tell the story of how thousands of suspected Nazi war criminals escaped justice, show you where many of them are living comfortably today, and we'll bring you face to face with a former Gestapo officer who explains his crimes by saying, "I was just following orders." It is a chilling story of how Nazi killers live on, but an important one to know. As the philosopher George Santayana said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Ausdruck unseres Volkes und damit ein Symbol des Ewigen.
In the beginning, there was a madman.
Es lebe Deutschland!
Adolf Hitler's Third Reich ruled the continent of Europe. Powerful, arrogant, murderous. But in the end, it all came crashing down. As the Soviets closed in on the Fuhrer bunker in Berlin, Hitler shot himself. His mistress, Eva Braun, took poison. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels first poisoned his 6 children, then he and his wife poisoned themselves. But what of the others who served Hitler and his murderous regime? Some were brought to trial at Nuremberg and elsewhere. But not all. Many of them just disappeared. As it turns out, it was a disappearance well planned. Argentina, South America. It was a country off the beaten path in the mid-1940s with its own burgeoning Nazi movement. And with a former army colonel named Juan Perón in charge, a country ready to play a pivotal role in providing a safe haven for the Nazis. How many?
We do not know the size of the problem. Are we talking hundreds? Are we talking thousands?
I'm afraid that may be in the thousands.
Last December, Argentine Foreign Minister Guido de Tella took a giant step toward exposing the truth when he signed this decree, opening the secret files of government agencies, including the federal police and the foreign ministry. Now, after all these years, the world can finally see what Argentina did.
Visas were handed out just wholesale with no questions asked. There was a bit of that, yes. So the government knew that it was giving visas, allowing Nazi war criminals to come to Argentina.
Some people in government certainly did.
These are the archives of Argentine immigration. Everyone who registered into the country is listed here. After the war, when the Nazis began flooding in, some were so bold as to use their own names. Here's an entry from June of 1948. Schroeder, Eric Emil, says he was an engineer. Erich Schroeder was the Gestapo chief of Portugal. Some, of course, didn't use their own names. Here's an entry from July of 1950. Clement Ricardo says he was a technician. That's Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi who supervised the extermination of the Jews. And this one from June of 1949 at the very bottom of the page, here's the name Gregor Helmut, who says he was a mechanic. Who was this mechanic? Let's see.
Gregor lived in various Buenos Aires suburbs. For a time, he had a jungle hideaway nearby. But as the newly opened federal police records show, he felt safe enough after a few years to re-register under his real name, Jose Mengele, Dr. Joseph Mengele. He was no mechanic. At Auschwitz, they called him the Angel of Death. He helped select those who would live and die. He tortured and murdered children, particularly twins, with his medical experiments. Mengele is believed to have died in 1979 in Brazil. But we now have proof for the first time that the Argentine authorities knew about his activities in their country and protected him.
There you can see his activities here in the country, how he lived with such impunity.
When the archives were opened, Dr. Beatrice Gurevich, research director for Jewish organizations in Buenos Aires, set to work gathering data on Nazi war criminals like Mengele.
This is a document from the federal police.
Those are Mengele's fingerprints?
These are Mengele's fingerprints.
They had him on file?
Yes, of course. And the argument for not extraditing him was that Argentine didn't extradite people for political crimes.
Mengele? Political crimes?
So it is said in the document.
Well, Dr. Mengele was one of the great butchers of all times.
That was the argument. Why are you so astonished about this? This is absence of moral responsibility.
But this absence of moral responsibility was not Argentina's alone. Nazi war criminals needed help to escape Europe. They got it here in Rome, beginning with two highly unlikely sources, the intelligence services of Britain and the United States.
They saved tens of thousands of Nazis in order to use them against the Soviets.
Peter Tompkins should know. He was a wartime spy working undercover in Rome for the American OSS, predecessor of the CIA.
Are you telling me that the OSS helped Nazis escape justice at the end of the war?
Oh, absolutely. They created a clandestine army of ex-Nazis, using people like Klaus Barbie, for instance, who said, oh, that's a good Nazi, that's a good Nazi, I know him, I know him, I know him.
But if it sounds incredible that the U.S. would use Klaus Barbie, later convicted in France as the Butcher of Lyon, because he and his fellow Nazis were thought to possess experience that could help against the Soviets, consider who else played a major role in the Nazis' escape route. None other than the Vatican.
The Vatican then had an entire system of monasteries and convents. We called it the Rat Line. That was the American code word for the operation.
The Rat Line.
The Rat Line.
John Loftus is a former Nazi hunter for the U.S. Justice Department, who spent years investigating this elaborate escape route known as the Rat Line. He says Pope Pius XII was pro-German because he saw the Nazis as a bulwark against the communists, whose ideology the Pope viewed as a mortal threat to the Church. So beginning in 1945, the Pope allowed one of his bishops to produce phony ID for fugitive Nazis. Bishop Alois Hudol, with the blessing of some British and U.S. government officials, set up shop in this nondescript rectory just outside the Vatican.
My estimate is that we sent some 60,000 fugitive Nazi war criminals to Argentina after World War II during a 5-year period.